Over sea, under stone. Day 1. Chapter 1. Where is he? Barney hopped from one foot to the other as he clambered down from the train, peering in vain through the white-faced crowds flooding eagerly into the St. Austell ticket barrier. Oh, I can't see him. Is he there? Of course he's there, Simon said, struggling to clutch the long canvas bundle of his father's fishing rods. He said he'd meet us with a car. Behind them, the big diesel locomotive hooted like a giant owl, and the train began to move. Stay where you are a minute, Father said, from a barricade of suitcases. Mary won't vanish. Let people get clear. Jane sniffed ecstatically. I can smell the sea. We're miles from the sea, Simon said loftily. I don't care. I can smell it. Truissic is 5 miles from St. Austell, Great Uncle Mary said. Oh, where is he? Barney said, still jigged impatiently on the dusty gray platform, glaring at the disappearing backs that masked his view. Then suddenly he stood still, gazing downwards. Hey, look! They looked. He was staring at a large black suitcase among the forest of shuffling legs. What's so marvelous about that? Jane said. Then they saw that the suitcase had 2 brown pricked ears and a long waving brown tail. Its owner picked it up and moved away, and the dog, which had been behind it, was left standing there alone, looking up and down the platform. He was a long, rangy, lean dog, and where the sunlight shafted down on his coat it gleamed dark red. Barney whistled and held out his hand. Darling, no, said his mother plaintively, clutching at the bunch of paintbrushes that sprouted from her pocket like a tuft of celery. But even before Barney whistled, the dog had begun trotting in their direction, swift and determined as if he were recognizing the old friends. He loped round them in a circle, raising his long red muzzle to each in turn, then stopped beside Jane and licked her hand. Isn't he gorgeous? Jane crouched beside him and ruffled the long silky fur of his neck. Darling, be careful, Mother said. He'll get left behind. He must belong to someone over there. I wished he belonged to us. So does he, Barney said. Look. He scratched the red head, and the dog gave a throaty half-bark of pleasure. No, Father said. The crowds were thinning now, and through the barrier they could see clear blue sky out over the station yard. His name's on his collar, Jane said, so down beside the dog's neck. She fumbled with the silver tab on the heavy strap. It says Rufus, and something else. Truissic. Hey, he comes from the village. But as soon as she looked up, suddenly the others were not there. She jumped to her feet and ran after them into the sunshine, seeing in an instant what they had seen, the towering familiar figure of Great Uncle Mary out in the yard, waiting for them. They clustered round him, chattering like squirrels round the base of a tree. Ah, there you are, he said casually, looking down at them from beneath his bristling white eyebrows with a slight smile. Cornwall's wonderful, Barney said, bubbling. You haven't seen it yet, said Great Uncle Mary. How are you, Ellen, my dear? He bent and aimed a brief peck at Mother's cheek. He treated her always as though he had forgotten that she had grown up. Although he was not her real uncle, but only a friend of her father, he had been close to the family for so many years that it never occurred to them to wonder where he had come from in the first place. Nobody knew very much about Great Uncle Mary, and nobody ever quite dared to ask. He did not look in the least like his name. He was tall and straight, with a lot of very thick, wild white hair. In his grim brown voice, the nose curved fiercely, like a bent brown face, the nose curved fiercely, like a bent bow, and his eyes were deep-set and dark. How old he was, nobody knew. Old as the hills, Father said, and they felt deep down that this was probably right. There was something about Great Uncle Mary that was like the hills, or the sea, or the sky, something ancient, but without age or end. Always, wherever he was, unusual things seemed to happen. He would often disappear for a long time, and then suddenly come through the Drews' front door as if he had never been away, announcing that he had found a lost valley in South America, a Roman fortress in France, or a burned Viking ship buried on the English coast. The newspapers would publish enthusiastic stories of what he had done, but by the time the reporters came knocking at the door, Great Uncle Mary would be gone again, back to the dusty peace of the university where he taught. They would wake up one morning, go to call him for breakfast, and find that he was not there, and then they would hear no more of him until the next time, perhaps months later, that he appeared at the door. It hardly seemed possible that this summer, in the house he had rented for them in the Truissic, they would be with him in one place for 4 whole weeks. The sunlight glinting on his white hair, Great Uncle Mary scooped up their 2 biggest suitcases, one under each arm, and strode across the yard to a car. What'd you think of that? He demanded proudly. Following, they looked. It was a vast, battered estate car, with rusting mud guards and peeling paint, and mud caked on the hubs of the wheels. A wisp of steam curled up from the radiator. Smashing, said Simon. Mother said. Well, Mary, Father said cheerfully, I hope you're Well insured. Great Uncle Mary snorted. Nonsense. Splendid vehicle. I hired her from a farmer. She'll hold us all anyway. In you get. Jane glanced regretfully back at the station entrance as she clambered in after the rest. The red-haired dog was standing on the pavement, watching them, long pink tongue dangling over white teeth. Great Uncle Mary called, "Come on, Rufus." "Oh," Barney said in delight as a flurry of long legs and wet muzzle shot through the door and knocked him sideways. "Does he belong to you?" "Heaven forbid," Great Uncle Mary said, "but I suppose he'll belong to you three for the next month. The captain couldn't take him abroad, so Rufus goes with the gray house." He folded himself into the driving seat. "The gray house?" Simon said. "Is that what it's called? Why?" "Wait and see." The engine gave a hiccup and a roar, and then they were away. Through the streets and out of the town they thundered in the lurching car until hedges took the places of houses, thick wild hedges growing high and green as the road wound uphill, and behind them the grass sweeping up to the sky. And against the sky they saw nothing but lonely trees, stunted and bowed by the wind that blew from the sea, and yellow-gray outcrops of rock. "There you are," Great Uncle Mary shouted over the noise. He turned his head and waved one arm away from the steering wheel so that father moaned softly and hid his eyes. "Now you're in Cornwall, the real Cornwall. Logres is before you." The clatter was too loud for anyone to call back. "What's he mean, Logres?" demanded Jane. Simon shook his head and the dog licked his ear. "He means the land of the West," Barney said unexpectedly, pushing back the forelock of fair hair that always tumbled over his eyes. "It's the old name for Cornwall. King Arthur's name." Simon groaned. "I might have known." Ever since he had learned to read, Barney's greatest heroes had been King Arthur and his knights. In his dreams he found imaginary battles as a member of the Round Table, rescuing fair ladies and slaying false knights. He had been longing to come to the West Country. It gave him a strange feeling that he would in some way be coming home. He said resentfully, "You wait, Great Uncle Mary knows." And then, after what seemed a long time, the hills gave way to the long blue line of sea, and the village was before them. Trewhick seemed to be sleeping beneath its gray, slated-tiled roofs, along the narrow, winding streets down the hill. Silent behind their lace-curtained windows, the little square houses let the roar of the car bounce back from their whitewashed walls. Then Great Uncle Mary swung the wheel round, and suddenly they were driving along the edge of the harbor past water rippling and flashing golden in the afternoon sun. Sailing dinghies bobbed at their moorings along the quay, and a whole row of the Cornish fishing boats that they had seen only in pictures painted by their mother years before, stocky, worm-like boats, each with a stubby mast and a small square engine house in the stern. Nets hung dark over the harbor walls, and a few fishermen, hefty, brown-faced men in long boots that reached their thighs, glanced up idly as the car passed. Two or three grinned at Great Uncle Mary and waved. "Do they know you?" Simon said curiously. But Great Uncle Mary, who could become very deaf when he chose not to answer a question, only roared along the road that curved up the hill, high over the other side of the harbor, and suddenly stopped. "Here we are," he said. In the abrupt silence, their ears still numb from the thundering engine, they all turned from the sea to look at the other side of the road. They saw a terrace of houses sloping sideways up the steep hill, and in the middle of them, rising up like a tower, one tall, narrow house, with 3 rows of windows and a gabled roof. A somber house, painted dark gray, with the door and window frames shining white. The roof was slate-tiled, a high blue-gray arch facing out across the harbor to the sea. "The gray house," Great Uncle Mary said. They could smell a strangeness in the breeze that blew faintly on their faces down the hill, a beckoning smell of salt and seaweed and excitement. As they unloaded suitcases from the car, with Rufus darting in excited frenzy through everyone's legs, Simon suddenly clutched Jane by the arm. "Gosh, look!" He was looking out to sea, beyond the harbor mouth. Along his pointed figure, Jane saw the tall, graceful triangle of a yacht under full sail, moving lazily in towards Trewhick. "Pretty," she said with only mild enthusiasm. She did not share Simon's passion for boats. "She's a beauty. I wonder whose she is." Simon stood watching entranced. The yacht crept nearer, her sails beginning to flap, and then the tall white mainsail crumpled and dropped. They heard the rattle of rigging, very faint across the water, and the throaty cough of an engine. "Mother says we can go down and look at the harbor before supper," Barney said behind them. "Coming?" "Course. Will Great Uncle Mary come?" "He's going to put the car away." They set off down the road leading to the quay, beside a low gray wall with tufts of grass and pink valerian growing between its stones. In a few paces, Jane found she had forgotten her handkerchief, and she ran back to retrieve it from the car. Scrabbling on the floor by the back seat, she glanced up and stared for a moment through the windscreen, surprised. Great Uncle Mary, coming back towards the car from the gray house, had suddenly stopped in his tracks in the middle of the road. He was gazing down at the sea, and she realized that he had caught sight of the yacht. What startled her was the expression on his face. Standing there like a craggy, towering statue, he was frowning, fierce and intense, almost as if he were looking and listening with senses other than his eyes and ears. He could never look frightened, she thought, but this was the nearest thing to it that she had ever seen. Cautious, startled, alarmed. What was the matter with him? Was there something strange about the yacht? Then he turned and went quickly back into the house, and Jane emerged thoughtfully from the car to follow the boys down the hill. The harbor was almost deserted. The sun was hot on their faces, and they felt the warmth of the stone quayside strike at their feet through their sandal soles. In the center, in front of the tall wooden warehouse doors, the quay jutted out square into the water, and a great heap of empty boxes towered above their heads. 3 seagulls walked tolerantly to the edge, out of their way. Before them, a small forest of spars and ropes swayed. The tide was only half high, and the decks of the moored boats were down below the quayside, out of sight. "Hey," Simon said, pointing through the harbor entrance. "That yacht's come in. Look. Isn't she marvelous?" The slim white boat sat at anchor beside the harbor wall, protected from the open sea by the headland end on which the gray house stood. Jane said, "Do you think that there is anything odd about her?" "Odd? Why should there be?" "Oh, I don't know. Perhaps she belongs to the harbor master," Barney said. "Places this size don't have harbor masters, you little fathead. Only ports like father went to in the Navy." "Oh, yes, they do. Clever sticks. There's a little black door on the corner over there, marked Harbor Master's office." Barney hopped triumphantly up and down and frightened a seagull away. It ran a few steps and then flew off, flapping low over the water and bleeding into the distance. "Oh, well," Simon said amiably, shoving his hands in his pockets and standing with his legs apart, rocking on his heels in his captain on the bridge stance. "One up, still. That boat must belong to someone pretty rich. You could cross the channel in her, or even the Atlantic." "Ugh," said Jane. She swam as well as anybody, but she was the only member of the Drew family who disliked the open sea. Fancy crossing the Atlantic in a thing that size. Simon grinned wickedly. "Smashing. Great big waves picking you up and bringing you down, swoosh. Everything falling about, pots and pans upsetting in the galley, and the deck going up and down, up and down." "You'll make her sick," Barney said calmly. "Rubbish. On dry land, out here in the sun?" "Yes, you will. She looks a bit green already. Look." "I don't." "Oh, yes, you do. I can't think why you weren't ill in the train like you usually are. Just think of those waves in the Atlantic, and the mass swaying about, and nobody with an appetite for their breakfast except me." "Oh, shut up. I'm not going to listen." And poor Jane turned and ran round the side of the mountain of fishy-smelling boxes, which had probably been more effective on her imagination than the thought of the sea. "Girls," said Simon cheerfully. There was suddenly an ear-splitting crash from the other side of the boxes, a scream and a noise of metal jingling on concrete. Simon and Barney gazed horrified at one another for a moment and rushed round to the other side. Jane was lying on the ground with a bicycle on top of her, its front wheel still spinning round. A tall, dark-haired boy lay sprawled across the quay not far away. A box of tins and packets of food had spilled from the bicycle carrier, and milk was trickling in a white puddle from a broken bottle splintered, glittering in the sun. The boy scrambled to his feet, glaring at Jane. He was all in a navy blue, his trousers tucked into Wellington boots. He had a short, thick neck and a strangely flat face, twisted now with ill temper. "Look where he's going. Look where he's going. Can't you?" he snarled, the Cornish accent made ugly by anger. "Get out of me way." He jerked the bicycle upright, taking no heed of Jane. The pedal caught her ankle, and she winced with pain. "It wasn't my fault," she said with some spirit. "You came rushing up without looking where you were going." Barney crossed to her in silence and helped her to her feet. The boy sullenly began picking up his spilled tins and slamming them back into the box. Jane picked one up to help, but as she reached it towards the box, the boy knocked her hand away, sending the tin spinning across the quay. "Leave it alone," he growled. "Look here," Simon said indignantly, "there's no need for that." "Shut your mouth," said the boy shortly, without even looking up. "Shut your own," Simon said belligerently. "Oh, Simon, don't," Jane said unhappily. "If he wants to be beastly, then let him." Her leg was stinging viciously, and blood trickled down from a graze on her knee. Simon looked at her flushed face, hearing the strain in her voice. He bit his lip. The boy pushed his bicycle to lean against the pile of boxes, scowling at Barney as he jumped nervously out of the way. Then rage suddenly snarled out of him again. "Off the lot of you!" he snapped. Then he had never heard the word he used, but the tone was unmistakable, and Simon went hot with resentment and clenched his fist to lunge forward, but Jane clutched him back, and the boy moved quickly to the edge of the quay and climbed down over the edge, facing them, the box of groceries in his arms. They heard a thumping, clattering noise, and looking over the edge, they saw him lurching about in a rowing dinghy. He untied his mooring rope from a ring in the wall and began edging out through the other boats into the open harbor, standing up with one oar thrust down over the stern. Moving hastily and angrily, he clouded the dinghy hard against the side of one of the big fishing boats, but took no notice. Soon he was out in the open water, sculling rapidly, one-handed, and glaring back at them in sneering contempt. As he did so, they heard a clatter of feet moving rapidly over hollow wood from inside the injured fishing boat. A small, wizened figure popped up suddenly from a hatch in the deck and waved its arms about in fury, shouting over the water towards the boy in a surprisingly deep voice. The boy deliberately turned his back, still sculling, and the dinghy disappeared outside the harbor entrance round the jutting wall. The little man shook his fist, then turned towards the quay, leaping neatly from the deck of one boat to another until he reached the ladder in the wall and climbed up by the children's feet. He wore the inevitable navy blue jersey and trousers, with long boots reaching up his legs. "Clumsy young limb, that Bill Hoover," he said crossly. "Wait till I catch him, that's all. Just wait." Then he seemed to realize that the children were more than just part of the quay. He grunted, flashing a quick glance at their tense faces and the blood on Jane's knee. "Thought I heard voices from below," he said more gently. "You been having trouble with him?" He jerked his hand out to sea. "He knocked my sister over with his bike," Simon said indignantly. "It was my fault, really. I made her run into him. But he was beastly rude, and he bashed Jane's hand away, and then he went off before I could hit him," he ended lamely. The old fisherman smiled at them. "Ah, well, don't take no count of him. Him a bad lot, that lad, evil-tempered as they come, and evil-minded with it. You keep away from him." "We shall," Jane said with feeling, rubbing her leg gingerly. The fisherman clicked his tongue. "That's a nasty old cut you got there. My dear, you want to go and get washed up? You on holiday here, I dare say?" "We're staying in the gray house," Simon said, "up there on the hill." The fisherman glanced at him quickly, a flicker of interest passing over the impassive brown wrinkled face. "Are you, then? I wonder, maybe." He went stopped short strangely, as if he were quickly changing his mind about what he had been going to say. Simon, puzzled, waited for him to go on, but Barney, who had not been listening, turned round from where he had been peering over the edge of the quay. "Is that your boat out there?" The fisherman looked at him, half taken aback and half amused, as he would have looked at some small, unexpected animal that barked. "That's right, me handsome, the one I just come off." "Don't the other fishermen mind you jumping over their boats?" The old man laughed, a cheerful, rusty noise. "I had no other way to get ashore from there. Nobody minds you coming across their boat so long as you don't mark her. Are you going out fishing?" "Not for a while, my dear," said the fisherman amiably, pulling a piece of dirty rag from his pocket and scrubbing it at the oil marks on his hands. "Go out with sundown, we do, and come back with dawn." Barney beamed. "I shall get up early and watch you come in. Believe then when I see it," said the fisherman with a twinkle. "Now look, you run and take your little sister home and wash that leg. Don't know what scales and muck have got into it off here." He scuffed at the quay with his glistening boot. "Yes, come on, Jane," Simon said. He took one more look out at the quiet line of boats, then put up his hand to peer into the sun. "I say, that oaf with the bicycle, he's going on board the yacht." Jane and Barney looked. Out beyond the far harbor wall, a dark shape was bobbing against the long white hull of the silent yacht. They could just see the boy climbing up the side and two figures meeting him on the deck. Then all three disappeared and the boat lay deserted again. "Ah," said the fisherman, "so that's it. Young Bill were buying stores and patrol and all yesterday. Enough for a navy, but nobody could get it out of him who they was for. Tidy old boat that and cruising, I suppose. Can't see what he made all the mystery about." He began to walk along the quay, a rolling small figure with the folded tops of his boots slapping his legs at every step. Barney trotted beside him, talking earnestly, and rejoined the others at the corner as the old man, waving to them, turned off towards the village. "His name's Mr. Penhallow, and his boat's called the White Heather. He says they got 100 stone of pilchard last night, and they get more tomorrow because it's going to rain. One day you'll ask too many questions," said Jane. "Rain," said Simon incredulously, looking at the blue sky. "That's what he said." "Rubbish. He must be nuts." "I bet he's right. Fishermen always know things, especially Cornish fishermen. You ask Great-Uncle Mary." But Great-Uncle Mary, when they sat down to their first supper in the gray house, was not there. Only their parents and the beaming, red-cheeked village woman, Mrs. Polk, who was to come in every day to help with the cooking and cleaning. Great-Uncle Mary had gone away. "He must have said something," Jane said. Father shrugged. "Not really. He just muttered about having to go and look for something and roared off in a car like a thunderbolt." "But we've only just got here." Simon said, hurt. Never mind, Mother said comfortably. You know what he is. He'll be back in his own good time. Barney gazed dreamily at the Cornish pasties Mrs. Balk had made for their supper. He's gone on a quest. He might take years and years. You can search and search on a quest, and in the end, you may never get there at all. Quest my foot, Simon said irritably. He's just gone chasing after some stupid old tomb in a church or something. Why couldn't he have told us? I expect to be back in the morning, Jane said. She looked out of the window across the low gray wall edging the road. The light was beginning to die, and as the sun sank behind their headland, the sea was turning to a dark gray-green, and slow mist creeping into the harbor. Through the growing haze she saw a dim shape move down on the water, and above it a brief flash of light. First a red pinprick in the gloom, and then a green and white points of light above both. And she sat up suddenly as she realized that what she could see was the mysterious white yacht moving out of Trewisse's harbor as silently and strangely as it had come. Chapter 2. Next day, as they sat eating breakfast, Great Uncle Mary came back. He loomed in the doorway, tall and hollow-eyed under the thatch of white hair, and beamed at their surprised faces. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Any coffee left?" The ornaments seemed to rattle on the mantelpiece as he spoke. Great Uncle Mary always gave the impression of being far too big for any room he was in. Father reached out imperatively to pull up another chair. "What's it like out this morning, Mary? Doesn't look so good to me." Great Uncle Mary sat down and helped himself to toast, holding the slice in one large palm while he spread butter on it with Father's knife. "Cloud, thick, coming in from the sea. We're going to have rain." Barney was fidgeting with unbearable curiosity, suddenly forgetting the family rule that they should never ask their mysterious great-uncle questions about himself. He burst out, "Mary, where have you been?" In the heat of the moment, he used the pet name which he had invented when he was very small. They all used it sometimes still, but not for every day. Jane hissed quietly between her teeth, and Simon glared at him across the table. But Great Uncle Mary seemed not to have heard him, or not to have heard. "It may not last," he went on conversationally to Father, through a mouthful of toast, "but I think we shall have it for most of the day." "Will there be thunder?" Jane said. Simon added hopefully, "Shall we have a storm at sea?" Barney sat silent with their voices eddied around the table. "The weather," he said to himself in exasperation, "all of them talking about the weather, when Great Uncle Mary's just come back from his quest." Then over their voices there came a low rumble of thunder and the first splattering sounds of rain. As everyone rushed to the window to look out at the heavy gray sky, Barney crossed unnoticed to his great uncle and slipped his hand into his for a moment. "Mary," he said softly, "did you find it? What you were looking for?" He expected Great Uncle Mary to look past him with the familiar, amiable, obstinate expression that greeted any question, but the big man looked down at him almost absently. The eyebrows were drawn forbiddingly together on the craggy, secret face, and there was the old fierceness in the dark hollows and lines. He said gently, "No, Barnabas, I didn't find it this time." Then it was as if a blanket came down again over his face. "I must go and put the car away," he called to Father, and went out. The thunder rolled quietly far out over the sea, but the rain fell with great insistence, blurring the windows as it washed down outside. The children wandered aimlessly about the house. Before lunch, they tried going for a walk in the rain, but came back damp and depressed. Halfway through the afternoon, Mother put her head round the door. "I'm going upstairs to work until supper. Now look, you three. You can go where you like in the house, but you must promise not to touch anything that's obviously been put away. Everything valuable is all locked up, but I don't want you poking at anyone's private papers or belongings. All right?" "We promise," Jane said, and Simon nodded. In a little while, Father muffled himself in a big black oilskin and went off through the rain to see the harbor master. Jane wandered round the bookshelves, but all the books within reach seemed to have titles like "Round the Horn" or "Log Book of the Virtue, 1886," and she thought them very dull. Simon, who had been sitting making darts out of the morning paper, suddenly crumpled them all up irritably. "I'm fed up with this. What should we do?" Barney stared gloomily out of the window. "It's raining like anything. The water in the harbor's all flat, and on our first proper day. Oh, I hate the rain. I hate it. I hate it. I hate the rain." He began to chant morosely. Simon prowled restlessly around the room, looking at the pictures on the dark wallpaper. "It's a very dreary house when you're shut up inside. He doesn't seem to think about anything but the sea, does he, the captain? This time year you were going to be a sailor too. This time last year you were going to be a sailor too. Well, I changed my mind. Oh, well, I don't know. Anyway, I should go on a destroyer, not a potty little sailing ship like that one. What is it?" He peered up at the inscription under an engraving. "The Golden Hind. That was Drake's ship, when he sailed to America and discovered potatoes. That was Raleigh. Oh, well, said Barney, who didn't really care. What useless things they discovered, Simon said critically. I shouldn't have bothered about vegetables. I should have come back loaded with doubloons and diamonds and pearls. And apes and peacocks, said Jane, harkly vaguely back to a poetry lesson at school. And I should have gone exploring into the interior, and the rude natives would have turned me into a god and tried to offer me their wives. Why would natives be rude? Said Barney. Not that sort of rude, you idiot. It means, well, it's the sort of things natives are. It's what all the explorers call them. Let's be explorers, Jane said. We can explore the house. We haven't yet, not properly. It's like a strange land. We can work from the bottom all the way up to the top. And we should have to take provisions with us so we can have a picnic when we get there, said Barney, brightening. We haven't got any. We can ask Mrs. Polk, Jane said. She's making cakes for Mother in the kitchen. Come on. Mrs. Polk, in the kitchen, laughed all over her red face and said, What will you think of next, I wonder? But she gave them, neatly wrapped, a stack of freshly baked scones, cut in half, thickly buttered and put together again, a packet of squash fly biscuits, 3 apples, and a great slab of dark yellow-orange cake, thick and crumbling with fruit. And something to drink, said Simon commandingly, already the captain of the expedition. So Mrs. Polk good-humoredly added a big bottle of homemade lemonade to finish it off. There, she said, that'll take into St. Ives and back, I reckon. My rucksack's upstairs, said Simon. I'll get it. Oh, really, said Jane, who was beginning to feel a little foolish. We aren't even going outdoors. All explorers have rucksacks, Simon said severely, making for the door. I won't be a minute. Barney nibbled at some yellow cake crumbs from the table. This is smashing. Saffron cake, Mrs. Polk said proudly. You won't get that in London. Mrs. Polk, where's Rufus? Gone out, and a good job, too, though I dare say we shall have his great wet feet all over the floor before long. Professor took him for a walk. Now stop picking at that cake, my dear, or you'll spoil that picnic of yours. Simon came back with his rucksack. They filled it and went out in the little dark passageway from the kitchen, Mrs. Polk waving them farewell as solemnly as if they were off to the North Pole. Who did she say that had taken Rufus off for a walk? Said Jane. Great Uncle Mary, Barney said. They call him the Professor, didn't you know? Mr. Penhallow did as well. They talk as if they'd known him for years. They were on the first floor landing, long and dark, lit only from one small window. Jane waved her hand at a big wooden chest, half hidden in one corner. What's that? It's locked, said Simon, trying the lid. One of the things we mustn't touch, I suppose. Actually, it's full of native gold and ornaments. We'll collect it on the way back and stow it in the hold. Who's going to carry it? Demanded Barney, practically. Easy. We've got a string of native porters, all walking behind in a row and calling me boss. Catch me calling you boss. Actually, you ought to be the cabin boy and call me sir. Aye, sir, Simon bellowed suddenly. Shut up, said Jane. Mother's working at the other end of the landing. You'll make her do a smudge. What's in here? Said Barney. There was a dark door in the shadows at the far end of the landing. I haven't noticed it before. He turned the handle, and the door opened outward with a slow creak. I say, there's another little corridor down some steps, and a door at the end of it. Come on. They went down over the worn carpet beneath rows of old maps hanging on the walls. The little corridor, like all the house, had a smell of furniture polish and age and the sea, and yet nothing like these things really, but just the smell of strangeness. Hey, said Simon as Barney reached for the door. I'm the captain. I go first. There might be cannibals. Cannibals, said Barney with scorn, but he let Simon open the door. It was an odd little room, very small and bare, with one round leaded window looking out inland across the gray slate roofs and fields. There was a bed with a red and white gingham coverlet, and a wooden chair, a wardrobe, and a washstand with an outsized willow pattern bowl and ewer, and that was all. Well, that's not very interesting, said Jane, disappointed. She looked about, feeling something was missing. Look, there isn't even a carpet, just a bare floor. Barney pattered across to the window. What's this? He picked up something from the windowsill, long and dark with the glint of brass. It's a sort of tube. Simon took it from him and turned it about curiously. It's a telescope in a case. He unscrewed the case so that it came apart in 2 halves. No, it's not. What a swizz. It's just the case with nothing inside. Now I know what this room reminds me of, Jane said suddenly. It's like a cabin in a ship. That window looks just like a porthole. I think it must be the captain's bedroom. We have to take the telescope with us in case we lose our way, said Simon. Holding it up made him feel pleasantly important. Don't be silly. It's just an empty case, Jane said. Anyway, it's not ours. Put it back. Simon scowled at her. I mean, Jane said hastily, we're in the jungle, not at sea. So there are landmarks. Oh, all right. Simon put the case down reluctantly.